Okay, excellent. All right, I'll introduce myself again. I am JP Hodnett. I'm the paleontologist and program coordinator with the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission's Dinosaur Park, located in Laurel, Maryland. So here's a question. I always have to ask people first, who has heard of the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission Dinosaur Park? All right, some of you have not. That's all right, perfect. We are a very special place. We are one of the few active dinosaur fossil sites in the entirety of the state of Maryland. What I mean by active, we are continually finding fossils of dinosaurs and other things that lived with the dinosaurs at our park at a regular basis. We have free public programming twice a month where you guys get to come in. I'll explain a little bit more later, but you guys get to come in, help us find more of those fossils, and help secure our fossil resources for future generations. So anyway, I'm here to talk to all of you about something that's very special happening at Dinosaur Park. We have recently identified what we call a bone bed. So because I work with kids a lot, I always have to ask questions. Who knows what a bone bed is? Yes, you in the back, sir. What is a bone bed? It's a bed of bones. Yes, you lie out on a bone. No. Right. And there's some very famous places, especially with dinosaurs, that are bone beds. A couple places I can mention right off the top of my head. There's Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta, Canada, which are multiple bone beds throughout the entirety of the park. Dinosaur National Monument in Utah is a very famous bone bed relating to Jurassic dinosaurs. And so there's lots of places across the country that parks have been built off of bone beds. The fun thing is we were a park before the bone bed was discovered, so we're kind of ahead of the game now. But for us to find a bone bed is a very big deal for our own natural history in Maryland because there are hardly any records of a bone bed. The only one exception, which I'll talk about a little bit later, going back to 1887, so almost over 100 years, was the last bone bed, and no one really documented it. But anyway, so my presentation today is the Maryland Dinosaur Park Bone Bed and Early Cretaceous Treasure Chest. I absolutely believe in that statement, especially all the work we've done this year. So let me get started, and let me talk about the history, at least a brief history. And I want to talk about the history of finding dinosaurs in our state in essentially 4 phases. And this is primarily looking at these early Cretaceous fossils that we find at our park. So phase 1 is the initial discovery. And that goes back to 1858. There were 2 fossil teeth of a dinosaur that was discovered. And it's been proposed that the area that is now Dinosaur Park was the original site where these 2 teeth were collected. So these teeth were handed off to basically a government chemist by the name of Tyson. Tyson knew a gentleman in this area of Baltimore who was a dentist named Christopher Johnson, and he handed those fossils off to Christopher Johnson. And Johnson was super excited because he was interested in essentially the ancient natural history of America. Because at this time, in 1858, the very first dinosaur was described in our nation, and that was Hadrosaurus folci from New Jersey. And we don't want to make too much fun about New Jersey, but here we go. So in 1958, again, these 2 fossils are found. In 1959, these 2 fossils were briefly described by Christopher Johnson in basically a dental magazine. And what Johnson did in this magazine, and this is actually pretty interesting, he was kind of doing an overview of everything that was discovered so far in our country. And a lot of it had to do with the East Coast, because a lot of people have not gone out west yet to find some of the more important dinosaur fossils that we know of. So he kind of reviewed some of the stuff that was being described by a gentleman named Joseph Leidy. And in that statement, he says, yes, there's all these amazing things found in New Jersey, but in the state of Maryland, I have 2 reptile teeth that I have dubbed Astrodon, and that was it. He went into a little more details, like, oh yeah, there's like a mosasaur and there's a crocodile, but he said Astrodon, and that name stuck with these 2 fossils. And so that's the birth of our own very special dinosaur named Astrodon. I'm going to fast forward to 1865. So Christopher Johnson said, oh yeah, I have fossils of these 2 dinosaur teeth, which I have dubbed Astrodon. He gave them over to Joseph Leidy, who was the eminent naturalist and paleontologist, probably the very first American paleontologist in our nation that we can honor. And he did, again, a major description, a more scientific description of the known fossils from the East Coast in New Jersey, Maryland, and some other places. And he gave the binomial name of Astrodon, Astrodon johnsoni, and that's what we know of our state dinosaur, Astrodon. But when he described the teeth of Astrodon, and this is kind of important, he did not think of it as the dinosaur we now think of it today. He originally compared it to the teeth of a English dinosaur called Polacanthus. No, sorry, Haliosaurus. And Haliosaurus was an armored dinosaur, and that was kind of like where Joseph Leidy left it. So the next phase, phase 2, the Bone Wars. So fast forward about 20 years later. So at this time, there was a famous rivalry between two eminent paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh from Yale University and Edward Drinker Cope from the University of Pennsylvania and the Academy of Natural Sciences. And so Cope and Marsh had this basically competition of trying to outdo each other in terms of how many different names of ancient life they can come up with, based on discoveries mostly found out west. However, in 1887, Marsh was approached by John Wesley Powell, who just formulated the United States Geological Survey. And other question, does anybody know who John Wesley Powell is? Why is he so famous? He did the Grand Canyon, yes. He did the first major expedition from the Green River to the Colorado River, sailed down to the through the Colorado River to the Grand Canyon and climbed it. Now, if you do not know, what's interesting about John Wesley Powell is that he was one-armed. He only had one arm, and he actually climbed to the top from the base of the river all the way to the top of the Grand Canyon. And because of that expedition, he realized, we need to understand our geologic resources of our nation. So he basically helped form the United States Geological Survey. But anyway, when he was getting started with this, he was kind of like, we do not know too much about the geology and the paleontology of our own region, essentially the Washington, D.C., DMV kind of area. So he tapped his friend, Marsh, and said, Marsh, can you send yourself or one of your colleagues down to Maryland? And because we keep hearing rumors about fossils, can you come down and tell us a little bit more about what's out here? So he did. And so he sent over the winter of 1887 into the beginnings of 1888, John Bell Hatcher. Now, John Bell Hatcher was one of the most preeminent fossil collectors of his day. He's also collected probably the most Triceratops we know of since the 1800s. But anyway, so he came basically to our area. He started in southern Prince George's County, and he was finding basically Miocene fossils. And he slowly worked his way north because he's starting to hear more stories of where these fossils are coming from. And he was tipped off by a pine cone. I have to do that for Valerie because this part of the story. They were identifying Cretaceous pine cones basically in northern Prince George's County, and that led to some deposits that were coming out with vertebrate remains. And so some of the first major collections of dinosaur fossils were found in Prince George's County. Basically, the Route 1 stretch was basically kind of the dinosaur highway at the time. But they were tracing the railways to find these fossils. And they were looking in basically small mining operations. What they were mining in the area was ironstones, which are very prominent at Dinosaur Park. And these ironstones are loaded with fossils. And these ironstones are actually in deposits of clay, which also contain fossils. So Hatcher collected a whole series of fossils, including a bedding plane somewhere not far from Dinosaur Park that had multiple individual bones of dinosaurs in that given area. And he sent them back to Marsh. Marsh quickly described all of them in a quick paper in 1888. And he said, yes, I have a whole series of dinosaurs here. I believe they're Jurassic in age based on what I'm seeing, because they look very similar to the Jurassic dinosaurs I'm seeing out west. And so he formulated two species of dinosaurs that were, I guess you could call similar to what we think of Astrodon now. He called them one genus, Pleurocoelus. We divided them into two species, Pleurocoelus nanus and Pleurocoelus altus. Altus was the giant animal. And he thought there was basically these long-necked herbivorous dinosaurs. But the Pleurocoelus nanus was interesting. They were small bones, and he thought they were dwarf dinosaurs. So besides the Pleurocoelus bones, and I'll get back to why that's significant in a moment, but he also found teeth of other dinosaurs. So he found theropod, meat-eating dinosaurs of various different sizes, large animals, small animals. He also found a set of teeth of a herbivorous dinosaur called Priconodon. And so Marsh thought these Priconodon teeth originally were Stegosaurian, but now we actually think they're actually something else. Moving forward, so after Marsh passed away, people reviewed his work. So not only John Bell himself, but Marsh's predecessor, Richard S. Law at Yale University, they went back over all the fossils that were found in Maryland, and they did some revisions. The first things first they did was all the Pleurocoelus fossils that Marsh described, they all put them together with Astrodon. They are now considered all basically one species, and so we have adult forms, which originally was called Pleurocoelus altus, and now what we consider juvenile animals, which were originally called Pleurocoelus nanus. So the bone bed was largely juvenile Astrodon remains, and that again was the only bone bed we knew of up until very recently. But some other people actually did some additional work. One of the most famous ones was Charles Gilmore. Gilmore had some fossils that looked like ostrich-like dinosaurs, which were only really well known during the Cretaceous period. And so he actually revised the age of the area and considered the fossils that Marsh and Hatcher were digging up and looking at were not Jurassic, but they actually possibly were early Cretaceous. And so this actually brings up to phase 4. This is what we consider more present time, the early 20th century. So this whole area where people were previously finding fossils was privately owned. And most of what was privately owned was for a mining operation. It first started off again as some iron mining. So they were collecting up all these ironstones and making essentially pig iron from the minerals. But then the iron mining industry in the area kind of dried up, and so they switched to something a little bit more industrial, which was clay mining. Now, clay mining, if you understand the process, is highly destructive. You basically go through whole swaths of layers of clay. And the clay that actually produced the fossils themselves, the dark gray clays that we find at our park, they weren't exactly the desirable ones. It was actually the stuff that was like either above or below it. And so a lot of those fossil beds were actually ripped up and destroyed in the mining process. So in the 20th century, bits and pieces were salvaged by collectors, either from the Smithsonian or from private collectors, and many of which actually did wind up in the Smithsonian. But it wasn't until like the end of the 20th century, in the late 90s, when the property was proposed to be sold. And it's basically to be sold to be built up into basically an industrial complex, which is what you actually kind of see now. However, the paleontology community of the Maryland, DC area was kind of like, well, wait a minute, we know there's a long history of dinosaur fossils being found in this area and still being found. We need to conserve what's left. And so a deal was made, and the portion that is now in Dinosaur Park was sold to the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, and it's what we have now as Dinosaur Park. So Dinosaur Park officially opened in 2009, and we've actively been finding fossils there even to this day. But most of what we've been finding was just bits and pieces on the surface. On an average trip, you would come out, you wait for the rains to wash away the clays, and we will go up and pick up the little pieces of either teeth, bones, and the plant remains that we find most commonly. And that was kind of the general experience. That changed in 2021. So what happened was that we had a large ironstone outcropping, and there was a bit of bone exposed along the rim of it. And so that was originally identified in 2014. And it was kind of just left there because the Smithsonian was identified, and they were kind of like, well, it's an ironstone, it's really hard to collect. We're just going to let it sit there and hopefully naturally expose out, and we can see what it is. In 2018, about the time I came on the job, it was kind of like, well, you know what? This is slowly starting to fall apart and not really exposing much, so let's conserve it and then plan to dig it out. Well, we were making those plans, but then of course we had COVID that delayed us into 2021. But in 2021, we finally started excavating, and originally we thought it was just, okay, it's going to be like everything else we've been finding, just isolated, bits and pieces here and there, nothing really together. And that changed. There actually were more bones behind this ironstone block. And I'll talk about the ironstone block in a moment. But I also have to explain a little bit about geology and environment. Why are we finding fossils at Dinosaur Park the way we do? So first thing first, a little bit of a timeline. So here we have the Mesozoic timeline. So we have, of course, the Triassic, which has your classic, early dinosaurs from the upper part of the Triassic. We have Jurassic, things like Stegosaurus, usually found in late Jurassic, and of course, everybody's favorite, Tyrannosaurus rex, which is found at the very end of the Cretaceous period. Dinosaur Park represents the lower end of the Cretaceous period. It's specifically what we call the Aptian-Albian boundary, which is a point in time where it's a good transition. So we have things that are kind of like a Jurassic flavor kind of animals. We have a lot of long neck plant-eating dinosaurs. We have giant allosaur relatives that are still roaming the area. But then we have some of the first like early relatives of like Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor. They're at this time as well. Looking at our paleogeography, at this time during the early Cretaceous, the continent was still fairly connected. So there was an Appalachia side and there was a Laramida side, but it wasn't quite bisected by the Great Interior Seaway that we see later in the Cretaceous period. So, and also at this time, I would like to mention that where Dinosaur Park was, the Atlantic coast was actually a little bit closer than it is now. The rocks represent at our park the Patuxent Formation, or some people will call the Arundel Formation, or the Arundel clays. There's so many names that actually are given to the fossil-bearing beds. But most geologists go by the Patuxent Formation, and there's also these Arundel clay lenses. So what this bed represents, this is the lowest formation of what's known as the Potomac Group, and which extends all the way up into basically the beginning of the late Cretaceous. It's pretty much a coastal drainage deposit. Lots of clay, sands, ironstone beds, of course. And really, throughout much of the entirety of the Potomac Group, there's lots and lots of plants. It's really well known for plants. In fact, there's some famous history about some of the plant fossils that were found there, including some of the first evidence of flowering plants. And that goes to the historical identification of flowering plants going back to the early Cretaceous. Anyway, so what does Dinosaur Park look like? Well, here we are. So this reconstruction is what our world used to look like at Dinosaur Park approximately 115 million years ago during the early Cretaceous. Again, it's a drainage system, so it's going to be a series of rivers, streams going into marshlands and draining out into the coastline. We know there is a connection to the coastline as they are sharks. And what's interesting is, being a shark paleontologist by trade, these sharks are juveniles of a marine form. So the species is called Egertonotus, and Egertonotus is really well known from the Great Britain area, from marine deposits. We're talking about adults like yay big, but based on our fossils from Dinosaur Park, they're like little sharks like this. They're little bitty guys. So what's probably telling us is similar to salmon. These sharks are swimming up into the channels, laying their egg cases, and then going back out to sea, and then the juveniles hatch and live out most of their lives in the river channels until they mature. But there's other things. Of course, there's dinosaurs. They have a variety of different things. Large meat-eating dinosaurs, small meat-eating dinosaurs. Gigantic Astrodon are, of course, our star of our show. Armored dinosaurs, and ostrich-like dinosaurs, and some other individuals throughout the series. But what does Dinosaur Park really represent? It's the bottom of the river. All our clays is that drainage. It's just slowly moving waters laden with sediment, and they're slowly, losing their load into basically the channel deposit. Best way I can describe it, if you want to see a living model of this, go visit the Patuxent River Park. I have to promote it because it is part of our park system, but it's really good as in terms of like what the depositional environment was like during Dinosaur Park's time. For those of you who have not visited Dinosaur Park, this is what it looks like. You go there for, like during one of our off days where we don't have any programming, which allows you to access the fossil site. What you're going to see there is basically a hill of clay. And here's the hill of clay. And essentially, that's what you're going to see. And most people go like, wait, there's no dinosaurs here. Are you kidding? But the truth is, yeah, there's actually, amongst all the different debris and stuff like that, there are going to be little bits and pieces of bone. The middle picture here is pointing, fingers pointing to a little crocodile tooth. And then I have a little fragment of bone kind of sticking out next to a squash penny for scale. But that's usually kind of what our MO was about coming out to Dinosaur Park. And these are the kinds of things most people usually would find until very recently. But in terms of stratigraphy, this is kind of a cross-section of what our beds look like. The fossil unit that actually produces the most material is kind of squished in between the middle of two other clay beds. The lower lightish tan clay beds, they're hardly fossiliferous. There are a few chunks of ironstone that may have little bits and fragments of plant material in it, but there's nothing else in it. It's pretty barren, and of course that's what the type of clay was the clay miners originally wanted. The dark gray clay, the one in the middle, is what's loaded with fossils. And most of where our fossil bone bed is coming from is where the blue arrow is. We're near the base. So it seems like the lower we go, the more fossils of dinosaur remains we're going to find. The higher up, So far, we still see dinosaur remains, but not in high concentrations that we're seeing at the base of the unit. And then as you go transition to the higher, they're kind of a tannish buff colored tan clays. You'll see some bones and animal fragments at the base of it, but not too much higher as far as we can tell. But so what are we finding? So again, typical visit, you're going to see things like, okay, isolated teeth, there's a crocodile tooth there. You can find ironstone chunks, sometimes with bone inside of it, or just even just bone fragments in the clays themselves. You will see natural molds and casts of invertebrates, so we get lots of gastropods, snails, we get bivalves like clams and things like that. And then of course we get these massive chunks of ironstone that are just loaded with plant debris. Most of that plant debris is lignitized wood, but every once in a while you can get some really cool things like pine cone casts. And again, most of our typical method, we just wander the hillside picking things up. But this is our bone bed. This is what we have found so far this year. This is not updated, however. So this was from July. But in the corner of 1A, there's been a whole pocket of new bones been found in that section really recently. So we're still continually finding stuff. And now the plan is we're going to expand outward to the lateral side and see what else is there. But it's loaded with different types of creatures. In this one given area, which is not much wider than from this wall to that alligator, that's basically our deposit. That's our area we're digging right now. And so far, we found at least 7 species of dinosaurs. We found crocodiles. We found turtles. We found a fossil of a stingray. Matter of fact, it's the oldest stingray so far found on the side of the United States. And we also find some freshwater clams and things like that. We also get pine cones, which is Valerie's favorite topic. We've been finding them actually occurring in our dig site. Not only is these kind of like reverse casts of the pine cones, but we've been finding actually a little bit more lignitized pine cones as part of this. And of course, we also get lots and lots of wood. That is the thing you will find most commonly as we excavate. Just these big, long logs of basically carbonized wood chunks. And these would represent some sort of redwood or cypress relative. Valerie actually has some good suggestions that it might be related to sequoia, which I actually really support. And some of these wood actually will have things that look like amber inside of it. The other thing we're finding is coprolites, so we get a lot of crap. So we get crap for about a part. Anyway, but talking about our stingray here, so yeah, so this is the most telltale fossil of a stingray we have ever found. This is the stingray bar. This is the oldest stingray bar in the world right now. It's not the oldest stingray. There are some teeth that are actually found at the very base of the Cretaceous from, I think, in Europe around either Spain or France or something like that. But in terms of like a stingray fossil in North America, this is the oldest stingray fossil. The next one that's oldest is found in Texas at 100 million years. Ours is 115. So I'm currently writing this up, and so we'll have the announcement of the oldest stingray in North America coming out soon. And it's right here in Maryland. I mean, how many of you have ever found stingray fossils out on Calvert Cliffs and things like that? So everybody finds the plates and the barbs and things like that. So fantastic. Turtles. Now, the fossils I'm showing here are just examples of other turtles that have been found previously. So there are skulls of turtles. It's one of the few animals that we find within the parks region that actually have crania. There's at least 2 skulls, one from an animal called Rondelemes, lots of shell fragments. We also have Neomacheles, which is well distributed throughout North America during the Cretaceous. There's a new animal that's actually in the Smithsonian collection that was collected back in the late 80s. And there's some interesting ideas of what this could relate it to. Hopefully I'll get some better turtle experts than I am looking at this specimen, but it's basically a skull, the front end of a shell, and actually articulated arm and hand. And if you put the animal back together, it's probably having a shell roughly 3 feet long, maybe about a little bit wider than that. So we're talking about an Amazonian turtle size. So we have quite large turtles in our park. But these are some examples from our excavations. I have a better example actually on the table, which you guys could welcome to come look at after my presentation. And of course, we also have crocodiles. So these are just some of the general types of stuff we find at our parks. There's things called phallidosaurs, which are very large crocodiles. We're talking about, based on some of the largest fossils we have in our collections, we're talking about a crocodile on average could have been easily 25 feet long. And that's larger than most living crocodiles today. But it's not the most common. We have a thing called a gonifolid, which are an ancient group of crocodiles that did not survive past the Cretaceous period. And their teeth are everywhere. We have juveniles, we have adults, and we also get osteoderms every once in a while. But from our excavation, I'm going to pick on Cody here. So that's Cody a couple weeks ago. So yeah, that tooth is actually on the table there. That's one of the biggest crocodile teeth that come from our excavation so far. And then Cody's finding one of the most pristine crocodile teeth I've ever seen from our park. So they're there as part of this assemblage of things we're finding. And I have sneaky suspicion that a lot of those poops are actually coming from crocodiles. But anyway, talking about dinosaurs. So let's talk about Astrodon johnsoni, the Maryland state dinosaur. Most of what we know about Astrodon is from juvenile skeletal parts. And adult bones are generally rare, but it's a long-necked animal. So far, it's been hypothesized to be more closely related to Brachiosaurus than other sauropods, but there's still some back and forth in terms of like what it's really related to. And even one paleontologist has even challenged whether it's even a valid animal, valid genus in terms of the literature. So there's still some competition. But I want to point out this reconstruction right here. This is the collection of bones that makes up the juvenile skeleton. That is from the original bone bed from 1887. And again, it's from a site we're not 100% sure where. It's down the road, apparently from our park, possibly with the agricultural center that's near College Park. But our park does have one interesting element. This femur, before the park was a park, was discovered at Dinosaur Park, what is now Dinosaur Park. And it's on display at the Maryland Science Center in the Inner Harbor of Baltimore. So far, in terms of our park history, this is the largest bone that's been found in that area. It's just partial femur, so we're talking the upper thigh bone. And it was collected again in 1991. To give you kind of an idea how big some of these animals get, here's two reconstructions of what people think of Astrodon. So this is the reconstruction that actually is in the Maryland Science Center of Astrodon being hunted down by a giant meat-eating dinosaur. And then here's another one at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences with me for scale. So these are not small animals. And Astrodon is our start. It is our state dinosaur. It was designated our state dinosaur in 1998. And so far as we can tell, it's been the largest dinosaur found on this side of the United States. However, on the table here, and some of the stuff we've recently found this year have been two vertebrae and a claw. The claw is a little bit just indistinguishable from any other kind of sauropod as far as I can tell right now. But the vertebrae, which come from the end of the tail, comes from an animal that is not Astrodon. And from the shape and the morphology, the telltale anatomical features of it, is probably from an animal either is or related to some other sauropods that are found in North America at this time. Top suspect is a dinosaur called Sauroposeidon. And if anybody's ever looked up the history of Sauroposeidon, this animal is not small either. We estimate Astrodon to be approximately somewhere between 60 to 70 feet in length, which is still pretty decent size. However, some of the maximum length that's been proposed for Sauroposeidon is 112 feet, almost twice the length. And it's a massive animal. Most of what was originally found of Sauroposeidon, the original specimens, were vertebrae, and some of these vertebrae were over 4 feet long. So give you an idea of how big some of these things. These are neck vertebrae, by the way. And there's some partial skeletons or more complete skeletons been found in Texas that have been alluded to Sauroposeidon as well. So that's the exciting news, number one. We have a new record of a dinosaur at Dinosaur Park that is not Astrodon. So that's really cool. So far, that's a great result. The other thing, Acrocanthosaurus. Who's heard of Acrocanthosaurus in this audience? I got a few hands kind of like, yeah, but it's all right. Acrocanthosaurus, for you do not know, it was the Tyrannosaurus rex of its time. Wasn't a relative. It was actually more related to things like Giganotosaurus. Anybody's ever seen the last Jurassic World movie? That was the villain dinosaur of that film, that particular film. Giganotosaurus is from South America. Acrocanthosaurus is actually from North America. And it was pretty large. It got up to somewhere between 38 to 39 feet in length, which is about the same average size of a T-Rex. It wasn't as heavily built in the skull. It did have bigger arms with bigger claws, things like that. In the terms of the history of Maryland, most of what we knew about Acrocanthosaurus was from isolated teeth. We do find quite sizable teeth every once in a great while at our park, and most of them are either just fragments, or sometimes we get lucky and we get a more or less complete one, but that's what we knew until this year. So what we have now is in April of this year, in the middle picture, that is the tibia or shin bone, which is about 3 feet long, of basically a big giant meat-eating dinosaur that has a lot of features that shares with Acrocanthosaurus. As far as we know right now, it could be Acrocanthosaurus. So that's what on the top picture in the middle is what was found back in April, and this picture was taken a couple weeks ago as we were cleaning it. So this is the reverse side of that plaster jacket that we put on top. So we're pretty excited. So again, 3 feet, give you an idea, that's like yay tall. The thing weighs over a couple hundred pounds. And this is actually the original bone here on the left-hand side that got us going in terms of digging in the first place. Initially, when we first were working on digging it, we were realizing that this bone itself is 4 feet long, but it's in a block that was about 5 feet long of ironstone. And we thought because of the size, well, maybe it's a sauropod, or maybe it could be actually like a giant armored dinosaur. But now, because of the way things are laying out, and now we were able to flip the rock and the way the bone looks like on the underside, we're actually thinking it's probably the femur, the upper leg bone, to Acrocanthosaurus as well. And then later, after the tibia was found, just a month or so ago, we just now start finding the metatarsals. Those are part of the foot. So we potentially have most of a leg of a gigantic meat-eating dinosaur. These are the largest theropod meat-eating dinosaurs fossils that ever been found on this side of the continent. So we're super excited about that, and we're in the process of cleaning these up. So hopefully, stay tuned. We'll have more for you later. But there's other meat-eating dinosaur or bird-like dinosaurs at Dinosaur Park. We have ostrich-like relatives. Here's an example of some of the things that have been found before. So we have vertebrae, we have parts of the foot. In fact, if you're interested, we have a reconstructed foot of this ostrich-like dinosaur on display at the Laurel History Museum in downtown Laurel. If you're interested, come check it out. It's a free museum, and you'll see this foot that's this long with the toes and everything. It's part of it. But in our own excavations, again, very recently, this is August, we have a jaw. This is the first dinosaur jaw of a theropod to be found in our state. So it's very exciting in that aspect. So we'll have to talk to some paleontologists in terms of where this jaw goes. It's right at the very end where the beak would have been. I still have to do some prep work confirm whether there was teeth in it as well. Some of these early ostrich-like dinosaurs had teeth at the end of their jaws, but it's still early to say. But speaking of teeth, and also very excitingly, Maryland has a tyrannosaur. This is the first evidence of a tyrannosaur in our state. It's right on the table if you want to check it out. So far we have one tooth that came from the excavation, but we now have multiple other specimens that have been found throughout the park that we've been able to go back and identify. So, but this is a small animal. It's not a gigantic meat-eating monster like you see in the movies. This is a thing that's probably about the size of a pony, and was kind of like the coyote of its day. Maybe like smaller than that, like a fox or a jackal. But getting into another plant-eating dinosaur, which is very exciting for us, is this animal called Priconodon crassus. So Priconodon, again, was named by Marsh in 1888. But what Marsh had originally was just a series of teeth, and that was it. A few bits have come out over the last few decades prior to our discovery at Dinosaur Park. Like there is a tibia bone that was found earlier, but it's kind of on the beat up side. And that was the only really other bone that we knew about. The little osteodrome there, however, that came from early in our dig. But let me talk a little bit more about what Priconodon is. Priconodon is a gigantic plant-eating dinosaur. We're talking about an animal that could be easily at somewhere between 25 to 30 feet in length. It's one of the largest armored dinosaurs to ever evolve on our continent. And from what we have from Dinosaur Park, we have both the teeth and some bones of both adults and juveniles. To give you an idea on scale, of course, this thing is about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle in terms of the body size. It's a really long tail at the end. Previously, yeah, again, teeth was the primary thing that we've been finding scattered throughout our park. But now we're starting to find remains concentrated in our bone bed. So we do have teeth. So this is actually one of the more pristine teeth that we found in our park. Again, it's on the table. Check it out. This is a caudal vertebrae, which is also on the table here. No caudal vertebrae of a nodosaur dinosaur has ever been found in the state of Maryland or even on the east coast of North America. And we are also now finding osteoderms. One of the recent things we found in the far upper right-hand corner of our dig was a possible cervical spine. So these are the spikes off the neck of the armored dinosaur that's this long. So, and that was 2 weeks ago. So yeah, so we're getting some exciting things. And of course, we also have our mysteries. So we have a series of bones. We have some indescript vertebrae, which we'll need to clean up and try to figure out who they are. I have no idea what this is, but it almost looks like a pelvic bone, like what we call the ilium, so it's part of the hips here. But it's still too early to say. And then the thing on the far right there, it almost looks like the maxilla of a meat-eating dinosaur, but it's so coated with ironstone right now, it's again too early to say. So we have these large, like, mystery bones to work on to keep this going. So with that, kind of want to wrap up. So what's really cool about Dinosaur Park is that the public can get involved. And as part of our programming in terms of our excavations, the public can get involved with those too. We do offer private dig experiences with our bone bed excavation. The caveat is, one, you have to be 8 years old, and you have to have $10. And you pick a date, and you come out, and you basically get to dig with us for about 3 hours or more, depending on if you are athletic enough to go above beyond 3 hours. But we also have our free public days where every first and third Saturday, you can come out and not only help us find fossils on the surface, but you get to witness us excavate in our bone bed right now. And it's amazing some of the stuff we pull out. One of the bones on the table there was found during one of our public days, and everybody got excited. So there's always cool things to be found at our park. And just also let you know, April 12th, 2024, you guys are scheduled to come out to Dinosaur Park as a field trip. So mark your calendar. So with that, any questions? I did all the stuff right. Good. Plasteron or a chest piece of a turtle shell. I have the crocodile that was in part of the slide. Here's some ostrich dinosaur vertebrae claw. These are astronaut teeth that weren't necessarily found within the excavation, but they were found fairly recently within our park. And these are the caudals of the new sauropod that.
You may explore. Thank you, JP. Awesome. Well done.